So this video is over factoring trinomials. So again, we have our methods of how to factor. First thing, always pull out a greatest common factor first, then determine the number of terms and follow the according steps. All right, so we want to factor 5x squared plus 16x plus 3. First step, always look for a greatest common factor. Hopefully you realize here 5 can't go into 16, nor can it go into 3, and there's not an x in the last term, so there's not going to be any greatest common factor for this. If you need to go through and write out the prime factorization to see it, feel free to. I guarantee you there's no greatest common factor for this scenario though. So next thing we need to do is we need to determine the number of terms. So how many terms are in this polynomial? Hopefully you realize there are 3 terms. There's 5x squared is one term, 16x is another term, and 3 is another term. So we have 3 terms that we're looking at for this equation. So whenever we're dealing with 3 terms, again, I'm going to show you how to use AC grouping. If you've learned another method such as trial and error, bottoms up, or table method, however you've learned it, feel free to use that method if you're comfortable with it. I'm going to use AC grouping because that's what I'm comfortable with. All right, so our first step in AC grouping is we want to identify the A, the B, and the C. All right, so when I look at this, the A is the number in front of the x squared term. The number in front of the x squared term in this case is 5. The B is the number in front of the x term, which in this case is 16. And the C is just the constant or the number, which in this case would be 3. So I've identified my A is 5, my B is 16, and my C is 3. So my next step, I'm going to multiply A and C and list the factors. So I'm multiplying A and C. Oops. A is 5, C is 3, so I get 15. I want to go through now and I want to list every single pair of numbers that multiply to 15. Again, you want to list every possible pair that you could think of when you're doing this. So I always start off with the easy one, 1 and 15. Which means if I'm multiplying to positive 15, I also have negative 1 and negative 15. 2 won't divide into 15 evenly because it's not an even 15 is not an even number. So I go to 3. I know 3 times 5 is 15, which also means I have negative 3 times negative 5, which is positive 15. 4 does not go into 15 evenly. And then I circle up to the back side, which is 5. So I'm done. These are all of my pairs of factors of 15. All right, so my next step is I want to find a pair of factors that add to B. So I'm going to go through and add each of these factors to try to get to 15, or to try to get to 16, sorry, because my B is 16. 1 plus 15, 16. So I find it almost instantly in my line. So now I go to replace the middle term with the pair of factors that add to B. So instead of writing 16x, I'm going to write 1x and 15x. So my first term of 5x squared stays the same. And my last term of 3 stays the same. But my middle term, 16x, changes to a positive 1x and a positive 15x. So I've replaced my middle term. Now I'm just going to do factor by grouping. Factor by grouping, anytime there are 4 terms, that's what the process you want to do. So factor by grouping, group the first 2, group the last 2, and pull out what they have in common. So let's see here. 5x squared, I know, is 1 times 5 times x times x. And 1x, 1 times x. So the greatest common factor here between the, ooh, that's really big, sorry. Let's try this again. What they have in common here is the x. That means I'm going to go through and factor out an x of this. Again, you can look at what's left over. I have 1 times 5 times x, which is 5x. And then I have a positive 1. Again, if you can see the GCF here is x, feel free to skip writing out the prime factorization and just go right to this part. Just pay close attention to signs. All right, so we look at the second to the 15x and the 3. Again, I'm just going to write out prime factorization here. So 15x is 3 times 5 times x. Ooh, sorry, I forgot my 1 in there. Let's see if I can get it. 1 times 3 times 5 times x. And then 3 is just, ooh, sorry, 1 times 3. So when you look at these two, hopefully you see what they have in common is the 3. So my GCF is 3. So that means that's what I'm going to be able to factor out of these 2 terms. Again, you can divide the GCF into this, or you can look at what's not highlighted or circled in this case. So 1 times 5 times x is 5x. And then in the last part, I have a positive 1. Again, technically, we're going to put a plus sign between these 2. And then hopefully you realize between these 2, there's a greatest common factor of 5x plus 1. So I'm going to factor out that greatest common factor of 5x plus 1. What's left in the first part is an x. What's left in the second part is a positive 3. So my factored form for this polynomial, the quantity 5x plus 1 times the quantity x plus 3. Again, I always like to go through and double check my work because signs make a big difference. Sometimes if you mess up a sign, you mess up the whole problem. So multiply these 2 out using whichever method you like. I'm again just going to use the horizontal method. So 5x times x gives me 5x squared. Five x times 3, 15x. 1 times x, 1x. And then 1 times 3, 3. And then combine your 2 middle terms here. 15x plus 1x becomes 16x. Is my answer the same as the original problem? Yes, it is. That's how I know my factoring is correct.